Hey guys, I'm the Comics Kid 2099, and I want to talk about a book that I finished reading yesterday, Ignition City. This is written by Warren Ellis and drawn by Gianluca Pagliarani. I am very sorry. I guarantee you that I butchered that name. This book is basically a typical Warren Ellis book. And before I explain what that means, I will go ahead and explain the premise of this because it's kind of I don't want to say it's unheard of, but it's not as common as something else that I might be reviewing. The premise here is basically all of the 1930s science fiction characters all live in one world together, and they're all evil scumbags. This has got pastiches and homages to characters like Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, Dan Dare, and Commando Cody, which you may have heard of some of those characters, you may not have. Basically, all of those characters exist in the story with a different name. So instead of Buck Rogers, his name is, I think, Bunko or Bucko or something. It's like very similar. Bronco, maybe. I don't remember. And so basically, this is set in the 1950s, so it's about 20 years after the heyday of a lot of those characters. And on Earth, space travel, at least private space travel, has basically been outlawed everywhere except for this one island called Ignition City. And we're told that Ignition City is it's basically like Mos Eisley from the first Star Wars movie. It's a little place where there really is no law and order. It's just kind of a little centralized location where all these scumbags can go and do whatever they need to do. And it's Earth's last connection to outer space. There's a few different kinds of aliens that we see on this island, and they kind of do commerce with humanity there. If anyone wants to get off Earth, they go to Ignition City, because basically everywhere else in the world, traveling to space is no longer legal. And the story follows, this girl right here, Mariah Raven. And she's the daughter of the Dan Dare equivalent, who in this story I think his name is Rock Raven. And she finds out that her father has been killed. That's a slight spoiler, but it's within the first issue, so I think it'll be okay if I tell you that. And then she goes to Ignition City to find out who killed her father and basically get revenge. And it's a very... I'll say this, it's a good story, but what I said earlier about this being a typical Warren Ellis story, the problem I have here is that this is a very cynical book, and when you go back and read old school Flash Gordon or old school Buck Rogers or watch the Buck Rogers TV show or something like that, there's a sense of wonderment there. It's innocent is what it is. This was... all these stories came out in a time where there was a sense of innocence everywhere, really. It was a pre-Watergate era where even though in the middle of World War II, people knew that it wasn't just a cheery world to live in. There was problems with the world. People knew that, but still, you hear people from that era talk about living at that time, and it wasn't the sense of... I don't want to say it just there was less cynicism going on back then, and I kind of like that. And then you read this, and every single one of these characters are very selfish, very evil, and don't really care about anything or anyone. The only thing that any of these characters really care about is going into outer space and that sense of exploration. And you could say that going back into space represents that innocence, and these guys, they no longer have that innocence because for various reasons they are all trapped on Earth. And I do wish that Warren Ellis had tried a little harder to maybe make these characters a little less scumbaggish. It's okay if some of them are, but all of these characters basically are just jerks, and that's kind of their defining character traits. It's still a good story. It's well made. If you go back and read it after you've read it the first time, you can see a lot of seeds of later plot stuff being seeded early on, and that's the way to do it, where once you go back and reread something, you're like, oh, why didn't I catch that the first time? That's one of the marks of a good story, and this has that. I just wish that the characters felt like they were written by someone other than Warren Ellis, because this is kind of a trademark of his, where he does this sort of thing all over the place. His Astonishing X-Men was very much a story where all of the X-Men characters are basically jerks, and at the end of his first arc on Astonishing X-Men, spoiler, the Beast commits genocide, and everyone's just like, okay, let's go back to the headquarters and have a beer. Like, you know, that's something that Warren Ellis would do, and I just wish that he was a little better at coming up with characters who aren't just grumpy jerks all the time. And that's really my only complaint here, and you could make that complaint about just about everything that he's written. I can't think of a single thing he's written where that's not an issue that I have. But other than that, it's a fun premise. The idea that all of these characters, you know, like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon and all of them, exist in the same world, it's very fun. But if you're a fan of those types of stories and then you hear that premise, you will definitely want to keep your guard up when you go and read this, because this is not like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers actually teaming up. This is like, what if Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers were drunk and just mean to each other all the time? Like, this is kind of like that. And in fact, half of these characters are straight up evil, and then the other half, they're just grumpy. So yeah, that's really my one single complaint. The art is pretty good. It kind of reminds me of a cross between Steve Dillon and Frank Quitely. Let me see if I can find a good example of that. Like, the facial expressions kind of remind me of Steve Dillon, but then there are times when I see the characters like standing farther off, and it reminds me of Frank Quitely. So that's about all I have to say. I don't really have much else to say. This is just a standalone volume. It's not part of a series. So if you're looking for something that you can just read and be done with it, and you don't have to read a lot of stuff prior to or after whatever you're reading, this would be something that you might want to check out. Just keep in mind what I said about the characters in this are not exactly as optimistic and hopeful as you might want for a story that is about science fiction characters of yesteryear. But that's really my singular complaint. Other than that, I enjoyed this. It certainly won't sound like I enjoyed this if you're watching this video, but I did enjoy it. I just felt like my one complaint was a pretty big complaint. That's all I have to say, so I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different kind of video. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.